Welcome back. I'm playing Mordheim, City of the Damned, and we have finally completed our Sisters of Sigmar campaign. Definitely made some mistakes when making our characters, so why don't I summarize what I think worked well for us and what I wish I had done differently, so hopefully your playthrough will go a little bit smoother than mine, because I definitely felt like the Sisters should have been one of the easier campaigns, and overall it was, but even with that, I made it way harder than I thought it was going to have to be, which was quite disappointing for me here. So let's get started here with our matriarch. So what I found out worked quite well with them is, she's a divine spellcaster, so she can use heavy armor, so don't be worried about that if you're not familiar with how that works. But in terms of her skills, I liked putting a bunch of points into the weapon skill, because then her parry got higher. She was able to master Web of Steel, which worked out quite effective for us. And then it also allowed me to have the war cry, which I definitely would recommend, because that will significantly increase the amount of damage of your other units, since a lot of the Sisters of Sigmar, a lot of their units are all melee focused unless you're spellcasters, because they don't have access to range unless you use a ranged hero called the Smuggler. So definitely getting the war cry, I think, is very important, and then to do that you need to have up to 15 leadership here. I ended up putting a little more points into this just to increase her chance to pass the All Alone Fear and Terror. I did put quite a few points into Alertness too, just to kind of bring her initiative up a little bit higher, so that way she could heal a little more frequently. So that's up to you whether you'd prefer to get additional resistances here to pass your Terror, All Alone, and Fear, or whether you want to put more points into getting some more stun resistance, or to increase her initiative to heal. So I definitely agree with the Web of Steel and getting mastery there for when she has hammer and shield. Now if you're going to go purely two-handed weapon, then obviously that makes it totally unnecessary, because when she does this, the only thing she can do is dodge, and the chance of her dodging is only 5% with heavy armor on here. So War Cry to get that 20% damage to everyone within 5 meters, Web of Steel to get the 3 parry attempts and the chance to counterattack. Now she comes with Divine Fervor, so you're not able to change this at all, but this does allow you to reduce the cost of your next melee charge after you've done a spell casting. I absolutely recommend that you do Devotion and get that mastered to get the 15% reduced Divine Wrath chance, because when you start stacking this with the formulas to lower it even further, you can pretty much safely cast your AoE healing spells without suffering negative effects. Now, the big thing to know that I would definitely do differently is I would not get Piety on her. I didn't read this close enough until the very end. I read increases range of spells by 10 meters, so like, holy shit, that's huge when I'm using my AoE healing spell, except it says right here, it does not affect spells centered on the caster. And the 2 spells I'm more likely to use with her are both centered around the caster. So instead of this, what I would recommend instead is just getting the Shield Mastery, unless again you're going to be using her as a two-handed user, because that'll significantly increase her tankiness. And then I like making tanks, as you guys are aware, so I would strongly recommend Armor Proficiency. Alternatively, if you stopped putting so many points into your weapon skill and put 3 or 4 points into, what is it, 3 or 4, I can't remember now, 9. So you would have to you'd stop at 15 and put 4 here. The alternative is you could do Quick Incision, and then you could reduce the melee resistance more, because there was definitely times where that would have been very helpful, especially on the skirmish missions. Less so on the story missions, because on the story missions I tend to have her use the Sigmarite Great Hammer. And then I put the Devotion formula on there too, to really lower the Divine Wrath, because that drops it down to -24, plus the 15 from our Devotion, and then you can put Piety on here and lower it another 10. But when I'm using a sword and or a hammer and shield variant here, this only reduces it by 6. Now again, this one already came enchanted, and I was having trouble getting really good Sigmarite Warhammers here, but obviously I would have put the Devotion on there as well to lower that further. But by giving her these things, you know, her parry is already 100%. It would go over 100% with Shield Mastery, and her melee resistance would be even higher. So that's what I would typically do on most of my story missions, and then, or sorry, on the skirmish missions, and then the story missions I give her a two-handed and keep her in the back to always be healing. So that's what I would recommend for the most efficient build for her. If you're wanting to use a similar playstyle, do not get Piety on her. Now, in terms of the spells, I very much recommend that you get the Sigmar's Might going, because again, if she's buffing everybody, this increases your critical hit chance by 10% and your melee damage by 20%, which is great. The Healing Circle is a no-brainer. This is your AoE healing here, and unfortunately it does fail pretty regularly. You know, you get a minus 20% casting chance and Divine Wrath of 30%, so this is why you need to get your Divine Wrath rates much lower. Now, I did end up giving her Comet of Sigmar just because I had the Piety, so I figured I might as well be able to let her throw comets all over the screen since I put those points into it. But I think if I were to do this again, I would go with the Sigmar's Second Wind, and the reason for that is because it allows you to recover a stunned unit, and there's several times where that would have saved units from getting significantly more damaged, and it would have been just all around a much better thing for them. And then if you get this mastered, then you're restoring offensive points to 4, so it would have just been much better, I think, for her to have Sigmar's Second Wind instead of this. I don't find that the Sinful Speech is necessary. I'd rather just kill the mages right away, and again, I don't really care about the jumping. This I think could be really good, you know, increasing your range resistance of 50%, melee resistance to 10%, but it's only a single unit, so I'd much rather her, again, just be attacking unless she's way in the back, buffing everybody. But that's what I'd recommend for the spells for her. Yeah, and then this was just a different variant that I had that didn't have the Warcry, and again, I would not recommend this. I would have, instead of Piety, I would have Warcry there. I think that's by far the most efficient way of doing this, so that would have been a much more effective build. The Sister Superior, she's an excellent tank, and I liked her a lot. Now, you're not going to be able to have her built out this way when you play. I want you to be aware that I did use the Martial book here, so you would not be able to get the Quick Incision with this build here, because I think that added 2 or 3 skill points to Martial here, so I would not have been able to get this mastered, so be cognizant of that. So she has for Sigmar. Now again, this one she comes with, so you can't change that necessarily. I definitely recommend the Web of Steel, getting that mastered, because now she's allowed to parry 3 times, and like I said, she's an excellent tank. I would have 1, or I'd say 2 points to get her Quick Incision just for the basic, because I think that still is important to do. Shield Specialist to be able to allow her to tank even more. The Heavy Armor Proficiency. I have the Swift Counter mastered, so then I would have 4 points left. What I would likely do here is I would get her Flash Parry to be able to bring my parry chance to be even higher here, because that would raise it by another 10. Another option would be you could give her Anticipation, which would allow you to increase your melee resistance every time you're getting hit. The other option would be to lower some points here, and then you could get Awareness, and then that would just give her a 5% buff as well. So any of those things I think would be very good. And then I would still have 2 points left, so then what I would likely have done in retrospect is give her Insult, because that's just such a powerful ability, especially when you're engaged in combat here, because you can do, 3 for this, and that'll lower the melee resistance by 10%, and then you just finish your points off with the Web of Steel. And it's just a much more effective way of doing this, so I definitely would recommend doing it that way with these builds if you were wanting to do that. The Purifier here, she is your other healer. So again, she comes with the common of Sigmar, so I guess you could make an argument that maybe you should just master it so she can be a better ranged damage dealer, because she does do 40 to 50 damage pretty regularly with her comments, especially with the 16 intelligence. But again, I think a better option is giving her Sigmar's Might, giving her the heal, and maybe just 1 point into the Griffin's Heart to allow you to restore your, or sorry, not Griffin's Heart, Sigmar's Second Wind, to recover your stunned units, because again, being stunned in this game is just so catastrophic. And then you could possibly give Divine Revelation for your other points. It's really up to you, but definitely would have redone her allocation of points. I gave her the Web of Steel, which I definitely would recommend, because you need her to be tanky, because she cannot use heavy armor, so you want her to get as resistant as possible. She comes with Unsettling Charge, so if you're going to be charging somebody that has a stance and you hit, that will allow you to break the stance, which is nice. Again, for the same reasons for the Matriarch, I would strongly recommend Devotion to lower that Divine Wrath chance. I would not have gotten Piety. Instead, what I would recommend is stopping at 15 here and then putting 2 points into your accuracy, because she could have been a master quick incision person pretty easily, and that was actually something that was a little bit hard to do on a lot of these builds just because of the lack of points that a lot of these guys had. So I would much rather have done that, and I would keep the shield specialist, and then I like the swift counter. So I think that would have been a much more efficient build for her, because she was actually surprisingly good at dealing damage. And you could also make an argument that maybe putting a point into agility here to raise her melee resistance a little bit farther instead of trying to increase the damage. But again, she was doing so much damage that I actually rather enjoyed that build. Our Maiden of Sigmar, which is our impressive, ironically, because I don't know what happened. I just tended to get her injured, I think, a lot more. And I had her in training for a lot more because she's also a spellcaster, that I just never had the time to get her fully kitted out. But what I found to be highly effective is turning her into a dodger with the heavy armor, because she has so much agility and base strength. So you could, if you want to make her a full tank, you could put a bunch of toughness and things into her. But I found this to be really much more beneficial because, excuse me, you typically want to give your impressives two-handed weapons or two one-handed weapons, and then just put a bunch of buffs onto them with your formulas to really increase the amount of damage that she can do. But what I found to be highly effective with her is I put maximum points into agility and maxed out her strength. Then you can give her sidestep, which allows up to 3 dodge attempts. The Sisters of Sigmar have this as one of their active abilities, which increases your dodge by 30% for a cost of 2, and that allows her now to have like 120 dodge chance with the amount of agility that we have here, and that makes it really hard for somebody to hit her. Now, if you wanted to give her more health, you could take some of those agility points and put it into toughness. But because I have so many AoE heals and things like that, I found that I didn't really need her to have a ton of health. I mean, in a ton of health, she has 450 health just at baseline. So, she's pretty tanky to begin with, especially because she's one of the few impressive units that can actually use a heavy armor in addition to their just innate melee resistance. Now, the other thing is if you want her to be a full tank build, you could give her a one-handed weapon and a shield, and that would just make her have incredible amounts of resistance, because these guys start out with having some damage resistance as being an impressive unit. But overall, again, I think this works out really well. She has Sigmar's Chosen at baseline, so you can't change that, but that makes her effectively immune to ranged attacks because she has 216 resistance. You definitely want to get armor proficiency going as fast as possible because she has to use heavy armor, and she just can't move early on the game until you get that up. So you need to rush this as fast as possible. Because she is a healer, I recommend getting the Devotion. She can easily get Quick Incision mastered, so I recommend doing that. And then for the final points, what I would do is I would give her Fatality to increase her crit chance by an additional 10%. That will get her up to a 31% crit chance, and then what you'll have is 2 points. So then you can either give her the Vital Strike, which will give you an additional 10% crit chance. So that would bring her up to a 41% crit chance, so that would definitely be something that you could consider, and that would be highly effective. The other option is you could give her Righteous Fury. This, I think, is generally just a good ability to have on a bunch of characters, because if you find anybody that's stunned or easy to hit, then you can take away some of their offensive points and their strategy points, so something to always keep in the back of your mind here. But I think that's what I would have done as a more impressive build for her. And then she starts out with Sinful Speech. I particularly don't like that ability, as I've already disclosed, so getting her maxed out on the healing circle, that way she can heal if you're having a bunch of guys get damage dealt to you, is always helpful, so she can do some healing. And then again, for the same reasons, I would recommend Sigmar's Might and Sigmar's Second Wind, but for the most part she's not going to want to be casting too many spells, because you'd rather her be doing a shit ton of damage with the amount of strength that she has. I mean, she's hitting for 83 to 90, which is definitely quite good. Now, you know, if she has two Sigmarite Warhammers, then, you know, you could potentially get, what is that, 12 if you have two, which would cancel out the Sigmarite Great Hammer, and her damage would probably be higher, and you could then put ruins, or not ruins, empower both of these, and you could get it to surpass the Great Hammer, which I have here. But again, I just didn't have enough of the equipment because I wasn't able to do it. So I think if you're able to get purple one-handed weapons and you have good enchantments, it's almost always better to have two one-handed weapons, especially in her, because she's immune to tiring, than compared to the single hammer. But I just didn't have enough to get that going. But you end up giving her, you know, the Havoc Ruins. That's going to increase her critical hit chance by an additional 16% if you have two of them. So that's just how you can get her to do some crazy things for you. Now, you get access to two henchmen. I really like this build for the Novice. And her big thing is she's meant to be a dodger, so I put all my points into dodging. I got her up to 6 strength, and I put the rest of it into toughness so she could actually take a hit. She has sidestep. She can buff her sidestep with the Prayer of Swiftness, which gives her an additional 15% dodge, which is quite helpful. So she gets up to 120 just with those abilities. And then if she ends up landing attacks, which you can do 2 to 3 per turn, that'll increase your dodge chance by 5% for 1 turn per attack, and it's stackable, so you could potentially get another 15% dodge. So that makes her actually have really high survivability once you get her fully leveled. And then Righteous Fury, just to be able to take away some of those offensive strategy points. I like giving her the Quick Incision because, again, I like having her have the 3 attacks, so that reduces the melee resistance, giving her the sword and the shield specialist to increase her melee resistance, lowering the chance of her getting hit and therefore increasing the chance of her being able to dodge. I did give her the avoid ability. Perhaps in retrospect I would have given her something else, because with all these other bonuses it is a little bit redundant. And then I gave her anticipation as well, which gives her increased melee resistance, which was quite beneficial. Instead of the avoid, if I had to do it again, I'd probably give her either the fatality to increase her crit chances, or perhaps what is that thing called? There's one that allows you to get past dodge chances and parry chances, so I would do that. Alternatively, they have a passive ability to increase your fear, all alone, and terror check, so you could do something like that as well. So there's lots of other builds. I mean, certainly the avoid is not a bad option here, because it increases her survivability, and that's always the goal. So I would certainly have no problem doing the avoid again, but there is more options than just that one. And then in terms of the sisters, I built them out 2 different ways, and I think both are equally viable. What I was finding is I just didn't have enough light armor, because I just had so many sisters going because I preferred their passive abilities compared to the novices. But having 5 light armors plus the light armors for the heroes, it was just getting too hard to get them equipped. So some of them I gave the heavy armor ability to, and some I did not. But overall, I really liked my builds for both of them, so I think they're both equally viable. But I gave her Web of Steel, that way she has the parry ability, and as you can see she's got a 100% chance to parry. I gave her the Prayer Swiftness. Now, whether she should have this or not, it's debatable. It did increase the dodge chance by 15%, so it gets her up to 30, so when she would fight something that had to be dodged, that at least gave her a chance of dodging. It frequently failed, but that's what my thought process was, and it did work out pretty reasonable. She did dodge a couple of attacks, but again, it was nothing too great. And then the Righteous Fury again, because I just like having that on the henchmen, because whenever somebody would be stunned, I go and hit the Righteous Fury on them, or if they had a bunch of guys that had lowered the melee resistance so much with all of their quick incisions that I could easily get an attack even with that minus 20% chance to hit, then I could steal some more points away from our opponents. They have Repentance, so this is why I really liked the sisters, is because I could just run them all around and get Warpstone all over the map, because I'd pick up some Wordstone here, and then all of a sudden it increases your movement by 2 meters for 2 turns. It wasn't stackable, but that effectively means they could run all over the map even with the heavy armor and be picking up Warpstone and then also getting items later on as well, so that worked out quite well. I gave them Quick Incision, the Shield Specialist so they could survive, Flash Parry to increase that parry chance further, and then with these shield and one-handed weapon builds, I really like the Swift Counter because a 40% chance to recover offensive points works fairly regularly when you're triggering a bunch of parries and then you're countering for 1 offensive point. So if you do it, then these guys can potentially get up to 4 attacks per turn, or even higher, I suppose, if you recovered your points, because I think you can do that multiple times. So it made for a highly efficient build. And then the other version here is the one that has the heavy armor, and then just instead of Swift Counter, it has heavy armor proficiency, and that reduces the movement penalty here to 1. So that way you're still getting a bonus movement here with your Repentance instead of the 2. But you could definitely feel a difference between how much these guys could run around the map, whether they had the heavy armor or the light armor, because they can't master the armor proficiency. But I really like these guys. I think they worked out very, very well for us. So, and then in terms of our other heroes, I have the Smuggler. Again, she did not get leveled up all the way, so it's just, I find it much harder to level up a ranged unit than it is a melee unit, and that's because they are effectively the same way as a two-handed weapon, as they just have less attacks. Now, I like the hunting rifle because it has so much range, but ultimately I would have switched her to a different weapon because I wanted to ultimately make her into a crit build. And so what I'd recommend if you want to do that is you get her quick reload to reduce the strategic points for the reload, maximizing your bullseye so you reduce the cost of aim. However, if you want to make her a pure sniper, you can make an argument that you shouldn't do that because you'll be using a different ability. Trick Shot, which will increase the chance of her being able to hit by getting past the range resistance. The big things with increasing crit is you want to do Fine Tuning, which will increase your critical hit chance by 10%, so she'd be up to 27. And then following that, I would have gotten Sharpshooter, which would increase it by another 4%. So that'd be 27, 31. And you can, if you're doing a crit build, you want to use, is it the pistol? Yeah, the pistol. So that would increase your crit by another 7%. So now you're at like 38. Plus, if you have an enchantment to with the Havoc, then you can increase the crit on top of that. And then, if that's not enough, you can then come over here and you can give her Sniper Shot. And if you wanted to maximize that, effectively it's a ranged shot that deals regular damage and has a 25% chance to hit, so therefore you can nullify the need to use your bullseye here. And in addition to the 25% chance to hit, you get 5% critical hit chance and plus 25 critical hit damage. So this is how you can really turn her into a major critter, because with all those things together, you're now into the 40s, if not a little into the close to 50 with the sniper shot here. And that's unique to her. That's what you're using instead of the vital shot. So this is how you could really make her quite a high crit person. Yeah, fatality only affects melee damage, and deep wounds is another option because it looks like that just is critical hit damage, so you could get that plus another 20% potentially. So there's lots of ways of doing this. I typically recommend getting at least sidestep in case she gets stuck in melee. That way she can survive, because people definitely like to kill your ranged units, so that keeps her alive. And then the black powder trap, I have yet to see the AI successfully activate that, so just never use it. I tried it several times on the missions and it just didn't work. I thought maybe if it just ran around there that it would blow up and do damage, but I just never saw it go off. So our beloved Wolf Priest of Ulric, I did really like him. I think if I did this again, I would have given him a sword for a long period of time, because having him, I gave him the halberd because it just did so much damage and it allows him to have the parry. And at the very end, if he got to max level, he'd get 3 attacks. Right now, he only gets 3 attacks if he successfully parries, but unfortunately, I just never got him leveled up again enough. So maybe if I get access to him, if I do another faction, I might give him a one-handed weapon and see if that increases his chance to gain experience. But in terms of his levels, what I was doing is I was giving him Web of Steel to allow him to have 2 parry attempts, because again, I was either giving the halberd or sword to allow him to parry. Unfortunately, he does not get to use a shield, so keep that in mind. But he starts out with the Heart of the Wolf, which increases the chance to pass all alone fear and terror checks by 35%. So as you can see later on, he's almost immune, and if he's going to fail, you know, that's just terrible if that happens, because he should be in the 90s with everything. He's got armor proficiency to give him the heavy armor. Definitely recommend devotion, so that way he can spam his abilities, because he's a really good buffer. Likewise, I ended up increasing his spellcasting chance by 10%, giving him Ulric's Chosen, and then I was giving him the flash parry to increase his parry chance, because as you can see it still is quite low with the weapon skill even at 15. So that just increases his chance to allow his survivability to be higher. And then for his other points, you know, I think you could make an argument to give him Righteous Fury. If you could do Crush the Weak as well. But I would have to totally build him out differently, so that wouldn't work on this build that I had here. But if you wanted to stack your crits, that would definitely be an option for you here. But that's how I would build this guy out. Alternatively, because he has so much leadership, you could also give him Insult too with your remaining points. That would be another option here to allow us to lower the melee resistance further. And then in terms of his spells, I really like Ulric's Gift, so it increases melee hit chance and melee damage by 20%, so that's definitely really good. It also grants immunity to all alone, so early on you throw that on somebody that gets surrounded. The one downside is it prevents the use of flee, disengage, and range attacks and skills. So once you put this on somebody, it's going to stop you from being able to run away. So just, you gotta be careful that you don't end up getting your guys killed, because the Sisters of Sigmar all have the ability to disengage, unlike some factions which don't allow that. So just be careful you don't accidentally get somebody stuck in a combat. And then the other thing I really liked with these guys is the Blessing of Ulric, and what that does is it increases the critical hit chance by 10% and the critical hit damage by 20%. So you could throw this on guys, even your ranged units, and they'd at least benefit from the critical hit damage. And then I did not have any more spell points, but if I did, I would get the Ice Storm just to lower offensive points more. But I think it's also quite good to use the Wild Pack, because that provokes fear. And if that gets activated, then or they fail their check, then that will reduce the chance of you guys getting hit. So that could be quite good because it's an AoE. Let's see here. I mean, the wolf, Howl the Wolf would be good if you're doing a crit build too, because it increases your melee chance to hit and your crit chance by 5%, goes up to 10% once you master it, so that would be good too. So he just has so many really good things, and in fact he can do a significant amount of damage with his spells as well, especially if you were to give him some of the other passive abilities which increase the amount of spell damage he does if he lands a melee attack. So they're just very interesting units to use. You just got to decide how you want to build them out, but there's just so many good things you could do with these wolf priests. I really like them. Now, somebody I was much less enjoyed utilizing was the Augurs, and I think they're meant to pretty much be your crit damage dealers, but I just never leveled her up appropriately, so she just sucked for most of the game. But that was my own fault because I just kept forgetting to put her freaking points in, and so that was really disappointing. I gave her some toughness because I needed her to survive, because she would frequently get hit until the very end, because again, I didn't fucking use my points, so it just got me into a lot of unnecessary trouble. But she can be good. She's quite weak, as you see. She only has 3 strength, so she barely does any damage. She can take a hit, so she's got 6 toughness and 263 health, and then her agility is as high as it can be. I gave her sidestep mastery. I would have given her prayer of swiftness mastery as well, had I put more points into her intelligence. So the question is how far could I have taken that, and I'm not actually sure about this. The problem I had with her is she would frequently fail her checks, because you know she's only 50 to 60% chance to make it, so there's several times where she fled from combat and that almost got her killed, because while she's in her stance she's very hard to hit, but once she starts to freak out she's very easy to hit. And she has Sigmar sight. Now for me this is completely worthless because I never use perception, so that just effectively took away some of my passive skills, which made me sad. I gave her the shield specialist, which I would certainly recommend. Quick incision is what I was going for. With if I would have got another martial skill, I would have liked to master that, and I assume that's what I would have had access to. But again, I didn't get her all the way up to level 10, so I'm not 100% sure of that, but that was my hope. And then I did put 15 points into alertness, so she had 10% additional melee resistance. So that was kind of how I built her out. Like I said, it was not great. Perhaps taking some of those toughness points and putting them into strength would have been better, because it would only been 6% health, which is, you know, 12, 14, 15 health right here. So perhaps having a whole nother inventory spot and increasing her damage by 9% would be a better way of doing that. So hard for me to know. If I don't get up to 9 with her getting ring 10, then I'd stop at 10 and get her 1 here just to get that going. So not totally in love with her. The Sister Superiors were way more effective, and I would definitely recommend going with them, especially if you're doing a tank build like what I like to do, because then you just have another tank here who's going to do much more for you. I mean, the big thing that she was able to do is just run all over the map and gather items for me that were at different elevations. And then it was kind of nice to have a dodge hero, so if she had to she would fight like a Cryptor or something like that, or not Cryptor, a Chaos Spawn, she was able to dodge a lot of those attacks. But again, because she was so limited for most of the game, I just never really used her very much, because again, I was an idiot and I just didn't level her. So hopefully that gives you some ideas with some builds. I definitely really like the Smuggler. It's just so hard for her to be good, as just like any hero that you're building range, it just is hard to get them because they're just so squishy early on, and the AI tries to focus them down unless you put them at elevated positions. But definitely having her as a range can be good. Part of me also wants to consider building out a melee Smuggler build, because she also has a potential to do some really good crit damage as a melee user as well, so definitely something to consider. But for the most part, again, with all sisters that have no range other than their spells, it just didn't make any sense for me to have another melee guy, because there was times where I was having trouble getting my guys into combat because I would have so many guys surrounding units since they were all melee, that having some range damage was definitely helpful here. So I hope that gives you some ideas on how to build out the sisters, and I think that'll allow you to have a much smoother campaign than what I had. Again, use your points, have an idea of what you want to do, and level them up in between your missions, and things should go pretty well for you. Overall, the Sisters of Sigmar, I think, are one of the easier campaigns to use early on, and even in the middle it's a little bit frustrating because their heals are dependent on your spellcasting ability, and they seem to fail their spells a lot, and that's why you get 3 different healers and then later on a 4th when you have your impressive unit coming out. Perhaps going with dual purifiers for even more heals on the story missions would be beneficial as well, because like I said, they're surprisingly good, and they may actually have more utility than the Sister Superior, because I don't think you necessarily need another tank given that you're doing a tank build. So that would definitely have been another option to make this campaign way easier. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.